You are listening to Fox Radio 910 and 104.3. I want to welcome you to Let's Talk About, our weekly radio program sponsored by Crowning Touch Senior Moving Services of Roanoke, Virginia. My name is Linda Balentine, the president of Crowning Touch and your host for this series. I interview local characters, service providers, politicians, teachers, entrepreneurs, and business professionals, and each one is dedicated to improving life in our valley. Every person has an interesting perspective to share from all walks of life. So, let's begin today's interview. Today's story is one of love, loss, courage, and reunion. At just 17 years old, our guest made the heart-wrenching decision to place her baby for adoption. It was a closed adoption, meaning no contact, no information, no updates. And for years, she carried that chapter of her life quietly and privately. But as life often does, it took an unexpected turn. Years later, the child she had not seen since birth reached out, and what followed was a journey of reconnection, healing, and a bond that neither time nor distance could break. So joining us today is a woman whose story speaks to the strength of maternal love, the complexity of adoption, and the incredible power of reunion. I just want to welcome you, Robin. You've got such a great story, and I'm just going to cut you loose and let you launch. Let's hear about it. Robin Flint. Thank you so much, Robin.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back here with you again. So I wanted to share my story of adoption and placing my son in a closed adoption back in 1988. And the journey that we went on, because I think it speaks to a lot of people.
And it's such a miraculous and inspiring story. I'm glad you're willing to share it.
It absolutely is. It's not without its ups and downs and its turmoil, but, you know, in the end, I always say love wins.
I know. It's just wonderful. All righty, so kick off for us. All right, you're 17. Go back to when you're 17.
Ooh, I thought I knew everything at 17. I think we all do. And I was in love and ended up with an unplanned pregnancy. And I was raised to think, you know how parents sometimes do, they use the fear factor. So if you get pregnant, we're going to kick you out. Right. Well, so back then that was my thought. So I hid my pregnancy for 9 months.
See, I still don't know how you did that, but that's a feat in itself.
It was. I could tell you stories about that. But when I graduated high school at 6 months pregnant, I got 2 jobs, one that allowed me to buy baby items and one that had health insurance.
Yeah, see, that was so insightful of you.
It was. I was planning to parent. I didn't have much of a plan. I just knew deep down that this child was special and I was going to be the best mom that I could possibly be to him. So about a week before he was born, my employer said, I think you're pregnant. And I said, I think you're wrong.
Oh, wow.
And he broke me down finally and sent me across the street to the hospital, Lewis Gale Hospital, and said, you need to speak to a counselor. And I spoke to a counselor and I finally said the words, yes, I am pregnant.
Wow.
They rushed down the hall and got a doctor who did an ultrasound. And the doctor said, you're due in 7 days. The color drained from my face. I don't think I could speak. I can laugh about it now.
Because you hadn't even seen a doctor until that point. No. So you really didn't have a clue when that baby was coming.
I had no clue. I had no clue about pregnancy or anything. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm 6 months pregnant.
Did you keep it from everybody? You didn't tell a girlfriend? Was there anybody else? Wow.
The father of the baby knew, and that was it.
Wow, what a burden.
It was difficult. I remember laying down and seeing the baby move across my stomach. And that was the most, I don't really know how to explain it. It's like you want to share that with people, but you can't.
Right.
But yeah, we didn't talk about it with anybody.
So you never thought about abortion, did you?
No, absolutely not. It was never a thought for me. I knew that was just not a choice that I was able or willing to make. This child was going to be born and have a life.
And so the next step was dealing with your parents. I mean, you had to divulge that, right?
Yes, that was a tough one. I remember we didn't know who to tell, so we were very close with the father's sister, who was an older sister. So we went to her house and told her. And once she was able to regain the ability to speak, she took us over to his parents and sat us down with them and helped us tell them the news. And then they called my parents and told them. And my mother was in total shock and didn't get out of bed for 3 days.
Wow.
After that. And then plans all of a sudden as you can imagine, just started rolling. I was at my dad's house, and I'll never forget, I walked in, and my stepmother kind of confronted me and said, "What are your plans for this child?" And I said, "I'm going to parent." And her words just kind of hit me. What she said just kind of hit me. And it was, "You can't parent this child. You don't know how to be a parent. And really your only choice in this matter at this point is adoption."
And so how did you feel about that? How did you deal with that thought? I mean,
it was devastating. I just cried and cried and cried for the longest time. And it made me actually sit down and think about it. And when I talked it over with the father, he did not want to be a parent. He did not want to have, a child. He was a year younger than me. So he still had a year of high school.
Right. Wow.
So we made the decision. Well, the family kind of made the decision for me at that point, and I just kind of gave up. It was like being defeated, and I didn't have any say in the plans, who the adoption agency was, none of that. It was all done for me.
So you didn't have any say in any of that?
Not at all. And
why was it a closed adoption? Was that the only type that they had? In other words, they didn't have the type of adoptions that they do now. Is that correct? Or
I don't think that they did back. This was 1988, and the laws were a lot different back then. And, I think unless you went through a private agency or something.
I gotcha.
You could have had a different type of adoption. I didn't know anything about adoption until after my son was born, and there was a caseworker in the hospital room with me asking me to sign documents.
And so you held that baby for how long?
She asked me if I wanted to hold my son, and I said yes. So we went down to the nursery, the father and I, and we held him for 4 hours. We called our moms, and they came to the hospital, and they held him with us.
Right.
And then I laid him back in the bassinet and walked out of the hospital.
Now, you weren't a Christian then either,
no,
were you? So nobody was praying over that little baby?
Nobody. Nobody.
Isn't that something? So how did you cope emotionally after that? Okay, you walk out of that hospital empty-handed.
I did.
Tried to step back into your life as a 18-year-old now.
Yeah, that was it. I pretty much ignored it. Back then we didn't talk about things like that. So it was kind of like, if you don't talk about it, it doesn't happen or didn't happen. From that moment on, though, something in me was forever changed. The depression and anxiety set in, and I just started to develop a passion within me to reach out to other girls and women who were experiencing an unplanned pregnancy so that they didn't have to feel what I felt.
Matter of fact, that experience really directed the future path of your life.
It absolutely did, 100%. When I finally gave my life to Christ, I was 19 years old. And through that, for years I just said, what about me? Why me? And then I began to say, okay, why not me? I'm willing to reach out and minister to others. Lord, just teach me how to do it. Just guide me.
God brought another man into your life.
He did.
Is your husband to this day.
Yes.
And he was quite understanding. He said something very precious to you, didn't he?
He absolutely did. I had 2 pictures of my son that were taken right before he was adopted. He was adopted back then at 6 weeks. Apparently there was a time period where you could by a birth mother could change her mind.
Right.
I did not know that.
I was going to say, they didn't tell you that.
They did not tell me that. I was not told any of that. But so he was in foster care for 6 weeks. And the foster parents took 2 pictures of me, Polaroids to be exact, back then. And I had them on my TV stand. And my first date with my husband, he came to pick me up and said, "Who's that?" And I think the color drained from my face again. And I thought, oh no, here we go. But I told him the story, and he just said, okay. And then as, time went on and we were getting serious, he said, I just want you to know that if you ever get to meet your son, I will treat him as if he's one of my own.
See, that is so touching and such a strong thing for a man to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it had to almost seal the deal in your heart about who this guy was.
It kind of did. 33 years later, here we are. And I put him to the test.
All righty. So you went on then. God gave you your own children.
He did.
And then you ended up fostering some kids.
We did. Yes, I had 2 boys. My husband and I had 2 sons, and loved them dearly. Never told them about their brother because I didn't know if I would ever get to meet him again.
Right.
And one day I was going in for surgery, and my son called in sick from school that day. I don't know whether he was really sick or faking it, but he had to go to the pre-surgical appointment with me. And they ask you a question.
Yeah.
How many births have you had? And I said 3, and I'll never forget my son whipped his head around at me and said, 3? I said, we'll talk later, son. He said, no, we'll talk now. He was 11 at the time.
Wow.
But yeah, we went and broke the news to both of the boys. And my youngest son, I'll never forget, after we told him, he said, are there any other family members that we don't know about? That was his response.
So did you spend a lot of time wondering what I haven't ever been in that situation. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine not wondering what stage he's at during birthdays and holidays. Were they particularly hard for you, or how did you deal with that lapse of time, which truly, I'll give away part of it, turned out to be 19 years. Isn't that correct?
It did,
all righty.
yes.
So you've got 19 years of milestones, birthdays and holidays and stuff that you're even thinking about. Did you spend time reflecting at all on him, or once you had children, did that
always
pretty much stop it? Yeah.
No, I remember when I had my first son with my husband, laying in the hospital, holding him, crying my eyes out, thinking to myself, I don't deserve this. Uh-huh. I do not deserve to be a mom. God has really shown me grace and resilience and restorative love. And I just knew I was going to do the best I could.
Right.
For my kids.
Well, you not only did that, but you stepped up as a foster parent.
We did. When several years later, I was working in therapeutic foster care, and I thought, I can do this. Boy, that was a tough one. We did foster. For a while, we had several kids in our home, several wonderful children, but I had some health issues, and that ended that because we were not sure at the time where that health journey was going to take us.
Right.
So, yeah, we fostered for a while, and that chapter had to end.
During that time, did you ever question? I mean, I know that they said that it was a closed adoption, but mm-hmm. did you ever even try and search for your child in any sort of backdoor? Weren't you ever thinking, is there some way I can contact him? Did you ever try? Were you ever tempted to think that way?
I always thought that way. The funny thing is, back in '88, once you signed the documents signing your rights away, you also apparently signed away your right to ever search, and it was up to the child if he ever wanted to see you. When he was 6 years old, I'll never forget, I contacted DSS and said, I just want to know how my child is doing. And she said, I can't believe it took you 6 years to call.
Wow.
And I said, well, that's because nobody ever told me I could.
Wow.
So she called his adoptive parents and asked for an update, and I was given kind of an update,
wow.
a very
That's
general
fantastic.
Update. Didn't know where they were or who they were.
Right.
Didn't get to pick his parents or anything.
But you knew he was still alive.
He was alive. And I wrote letters to DSS to give to him if his parents would accept it.
That's the Department of Social Services.
Yes.
And was that a Virginia?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thing? Okay.
And
did they share those with him? Or?
They did share one. I don't know where the others ended up. But I do know that because on my son's 18th birthday, he was 18 and it was Christmas, I believe. Sorry. His adoptive parents gave him a letter and he read it at Christmas.
Wow.
And it told him in there that he had brothers. He was raised an only child.
Uh-huh.
So
did that stir him up because at a certain point he did reach out to you?
He did.
Let's talk about that. What was your first reaction?
Wow.
And how did he find you? Let's start there. How did he find you?
Every time we moved, I would always contact Department of Social Services and update them with my address and phone number in case he wanted to find me. I was going to make it as easy as possible. But in April 16th, 2007, he was a freshman at Virginia Tech when the shootings happened. And after that moment, it was a life-changing moment. I remember, like everybody else, sitting and watching the TV and watching the horror and the absolute sadness and crushing spirit unfold on our community. I didn't know he was there. And after that, his parents said, you know what, life's too short. If you want to find your birth family, let's do it.
Isn't that something? So they prompted him.
They did. And he was going to wait till after college and try to look for me. This just kind of said, let's just do it now. And so it was July 2nd, 2007. I was coming out of a business meeting surrounded by other professionals, and I got a phone call from Department of Social Services that said, your son wants to meet you. And I hit the floor. My legs collapsed.
I bet.
I was sobbing and I couldn't breathe. And there was all these people coming around me going, do you need an ambulance? Are you okay?
All that pent up
it just
emotion and
it was
worry
watching a 19-year prayer answered.
Isn't that something?
And it was like, thank you, God. I couldn't speak. It was just amazing. Amazing.
So what was your first conversation like? Did you have any fears about reconnecting? How did he call you? Is that what he did? Was he on the phone, or did somebody else call you and say that they were going to?
Department of Social Services called and said, is it okay?
Okay.
And I said, yes. And they said, well, unfortunately, we're doing some sort of records upgrade, so it'll be a few months.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And I thought, well, that's a punch in the face, but okay. So it was actually October 3rd when she called back and said, here's his name. They changed his name because I named him on his birth certificate. Mm-hmm. And here's his phone number. And so I waited. We set up a time. They said, don't call until 4:00, or he had exams or something. So 4:00 came. I was at a soccer game for my son, and I walked away from everybody, and I called and I said, I think I'm your mother. And he said, I think you are too.
Oh my.
And we both just cried on the phone. We talked for a little over an hour and decided, we wanted to meet face to face. Turns out he lived about an hour from me his whole life. And we were living about 45 minutes from Virginia Tech at the time. So we made a plan and went up to see him face to face.
Now, who went with you?
That was a tough one too. I took my husband and my 2 children and the birth father and his wife and 2 children.
Wow.
So I had to be reunited with him first and then go meet my son. The day came when we were going and I couldn't get out of bed. I was an emotional wreck.
I bet. You had to have some apprehensions. Didn't you have some apprehensions?
Many. It was like, is he going to hate me? Does he want to yell at me? Or is he going to ask me questions that I can't answer? Is he going to ask me questions that I'm scared to answer?
Right.
My husband finally just opened the shades about 1 p.m. in the bedroom and said, get up. We are doing this. So off we went.
Good for him.
And when we got there, my husband said, get out of the car. We walked up to the apartment door and I said, just give me a minute. And the sea of people that were with me backed up and left me standing in the middle of the hallway in front of his apartment door. And I said, give me a minute to breathe. My husband said no, reached over and rang that doorbell.
Wow. So did you, wow. So what are some of the first things that you talked about? How do you deal with somebody that you birthed, but that you haven't seen for 19 years?
When he opened that door, it was like looking at myself. I could see he still had the same funny blonde hair because he had the most beautiful shade of blonde hair when he was born. And
blue eyes.
Blue eyes, like his dad.
And he had the same blue eyes.
He had the same blue eyes, and they're crystal blue. And it was like looking at that baby again.
Wow.
He was all grown up into a man, and we hugged, and I cried. And then, it was just kind of like, tell me about yourself kind of thing.
Right.
And that's the way it went.
How did everybody else in your family react to that reunion? In other words, were they able to were they relaxed enough to establish a kind of ongoing,
absolutely
instantaneous relationship?
It was kind of, how you meet new people at first, and you go through all the preliminaries of how are you?
Yeah.
Tell me about yourself. Then everything started to relax a little bit, and he took us on a tour of the campus, and we went and grabbed some dinner, and he was raised an only child and has 4 brothers now all of a sudden.
Wow.
So he had to get to know his brothers, and he was really excited about that.
Could you even take your eyes off of him?
No, he was absolutely beautiful. I noticed everything. He has his father's hands to a T.
Oh, wow.
It was the little nuances that I noticed.
And he, did he talk about the upbringing with the family that he had? In other words, this doesn't create any kind of rift. Here his parents were encouraging him to contact you.
Yes.
So they're still primary in his life.
Absolutely. To this day, they're still primary.
So he's got his priorities squared up. He loves
Yes.
you, but he hasn't stepped away from them.
No, absolutely. And I would not let him do that.
That's good.
We've been through, it's been 18 years now, and we've been through graduation from college, moving across country for his first job. His mother invited me to drive with them to move him to his first apartment, and it was on Thanksgiving. So his mother and I and him, we celebrated Thanksgiving together in a strange city, and we have gone through his wedding. And I remember he said, "I don't know who to dance with on the mother and son dance." I said, "You dance with her."
Yeah, isn't that something? Well, you are of generous spirit, and so is she.
Absolutely.
So that really, really works out beautifully for them. So how do you describe your relationship today? In other words, he's got children himself, right?
He does. He's been married to a wonderful girl for several years, and they have 3 of the most beautiful children I've ever seen in my life. And we've had our ups and downs. It's been a lot of mixing of families. There's a lot of differences, but there's a lot of similarities in things. And we've had to learn to mesh 2 families into one family. His mother and father are angels to me. They did what I could not do.
Right.
And they raised a beautiful boy. And so we don't talk as much as we used to, his parents and I, just because for my own mental health reasons, I had to kind of take a step back.
Well, and you don't need to as much as you did initially.
Right.
In other words, once you established that bond and restored the history and who did what when.
Absolutely.
Then that story has been told.
It has. And I'm just thrilled that they have accepted me. I've met his entire family. I've met nieces. I've met cousins. I've met aunts, uncles. Not nieces because he was raised an only child, but just everybody. I've met them, and they're all wonderful people. And he was raised to be a strong man. He's a smart boy. He's a hard worker. He's raising a loving family, and I'm just proud of him.
That's got to make your heart sing.
It does.
I would think.
It really does.
So how has the reunion changed you personally? In other words, there were some big spiritual shifts that had to have, you felt like God answered prayer.
He did, in a big way.
And it made you stronger because now you are actually stepping up in your career to do what?
Finally, I have, you pray, God, show me your path. How am I supposed to use this? And so I am an outpatient counselor working on my LPC license in the state of Virginia. And I am almost finished with my certification to be an adoption counselor specialist.
Now, so nobody is going to be more qualified than you.
I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt kind of thing. Yeah. But God in all of this has opened doors because my passion is always to share my story. I want to minister to people who are going through this transition with adoption, whether it be adoptees, adoptive parents, or birth families. I just really want them to experience the love and be able to process the loss and the hurt that adoption is built on. Because let's face it, adoption's a beautiful thing, but it is built on a lot of hurt.
Sure.
And
so you've had that God connection to help you through. If you were going to give advice to other birth parents hoping to reunite with the child, I have a dear friend who's absolutely heartbroken because she's desperately trying to find her child and hopes he reaches out to her, and that may not happen before she dies. But what type of advice would you give somebody who's hoping to reunite? How do you build on that hope and encourage them?
Prayer is essential. God has a plan for everybody, and I know that not everybody's adoption story is as powerful and has a happy ending like mine does. But keep your focus on Christ, and God will provide you with the answers that you need. And also be careful what you pray for, because even in reunion, though my story is a beautiful thing, it hasn't been hunky-dory the whole time. There's a lot of ups and downs that you have to go through. So prepare yourself mentally and spiritually for the time that you do reunify with your family.
If you could speak to your 17-year-old self now, what would you say to her? And you're going to have that type of chance as a counselor. Chances are you're going to speak to a lot of 17, 18, 19-year-olds. But what would you say right now to yourself back then if you could have been right there alongside yourself?
I would have said, talk to my parents, tell them, make a plan. I didn't have time to learn anything or know what options there are. Don't let fear make the decision for you. So many women, I think, today resort to other avenues with an unplanned pregnancy. And give yourself options. Learn about the options. Seek help. There's so many services around that will answer questions, that will minister and love on you and help you find the answers to whatever it is that you need. So don't hide it. Don't hide it like I did.
Yeah, that is right. So do you see adoption and reunion as two chapters of the same story, or are they separate stories altogether?
I think they're separate stories because they don't all end in reunion. And nowadays there's so many open adoptions that reunion is already taking place. They already know the family. So I think they're two different things.
You mean from the very beginning?
Yes.
They know the beginning. Because don't they get to, I don't know that they get to approve the parent, but,
In lots of instances, but even, adoption through foster care, through foster families, a lot of those are open adoptions as well. So the families already know each other and there's already contact, pictures, shared life events, etc. I wouldn't change my path though. I don't know that I could have been, I could have had the life that I had having an open adoption because it would have just hurt me too much.
I gotcha. Well, adoption is never a simple story. It's layered with emotion, sacrifice, hope, and sometimes pain. But as we've heard from you today, it's also a story that doesn't necessarily end when the papers are signed. And for some, it's a beginning that circles back around in the most unexpected and beautiful ways, like it did with you. I want to thank you, Robin, for sharing such a personal, powerful journey with us, one that reminds us of the resilience of the human heart and the transformative power of love and forgiveness. If anybody listening today was touched, has questions, and wants to reach out to you, I'm going to share your number with them. All right, you can contact Robin Flint at 540-870-1973. Thank you so much, Robin. God bless you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Let's Talk About, courtesy of Crowning Touch Senior Moving Services of Roanoke, Virginia, the only moving company with a consignment shop, auction house, and real estate division. We are a one-stop shop for any senior making a move. Check out our website at crowningtouchusa.com. Or if you are planning a move, call Anna at 540-982-5800 to arrange a free estimate. And don't forget to check out our monthly browse and bid auctions at 6712 Williamson Road in Roanoke, where you can bid online on over 1,800 items each month. Meanwhile, let's get back together next Friday at noon for more of Let's Talk About on Fox 910 and 104.3.